Welcome to LDI 4.1. In this LDI, we're going to start taking a look at Chapter 4. And in Chapter 4, we're going to talk about how do we go about displaying data. Now, big deal here is going to be the relationship between the type of the display and the type of the data. Okay, so your display of data is going to depend basically upon two fairly straightforward categorizations of data. We'll talk about those in just a second. But the punchline is we use different plots for different data types. As a quick example, if we were going to take a look at, say, a set of blood pressure data, how we would choose to represent that graphically or visually would be very different than how to plot a summary of eye color. Okay, so let's get into the differences between data types right away to kind of make sense of all what I just said there, right? So there's basically qualitative variables, and those are variables which classify units into categories. Real good way of thinking about a qualitative variable is a categorical variable, okay? Categories may or may not have natural ordering to them. Qualitative variables are also called categorical variables, just like I said, all right? Now the second major type of variable that we're going to deal with is what is called a quantitative variable, and the root word there is quantity. Okay, so you look at quant right here, a quantity, so you know you're talking about numeric data, or numeric values that are measurements, lengths, weights, heights, etc. Or in many cases it counts. We're going to count things, how many there are. Main thing to know about quantitative data is that arithmetic operations make sense on such data sets. Okay. Now, within quantitative data sets, they're broken into two subcategories. The first one is a discrete or counting data. Okay, so discrete goes with counting. And the second is continuous, and the continuous ones are going to go with measurements. Okay, so any variable that you can measure, let's go ahead and go to a pen here and circle those in color. Okay, if it's a measurement, so it's a good trick. If you're measuring something, some sort of quantitative variable, then it's very likely that that was a continuous variable. On the other hand, if you were counting something, okay, so that's still a quantitative variable, but it's very likely if you're counting something that it was discrete. Okay, all right, we'll fill in some gaps there when we do the LDI here in just a minute. But before we do that, let's take a little look at an example from the textbook on how to discern between discrete and continuous variables. So let's look at these two examples. Let's say you take a quiz, a little quiz, okay? And it's a 5-question quiz, multiple choice, and either you get it right or you get it wrong on each of the questions. So what we've got here is a discrete set of data where 0 represents that I got none of them right, 1 represents that I got 1 right on the quiz, 2 right on the quiz, 3, 4, and 5. So this is a Scantron machine-graded quiz, and there's no possibility of getting 1.5 right on the quiz. Either I got none right, 1 right, 2 right, 3 right, 4 right, or 5 right. So those are the possible values that I could take on. Notice it's counting there, and it jumps from 0 to 1, and then from 1 to 2, and then from 2 to 3, etc. Okay? All right, let's contrast that to a continuous variable. Say you had a 50 milliliter glass container and you're pouring water in it. Well, now this time, any value is possible, okay? So I could fill the container up to, say, 3 liters, or I could fill the container up to 25.2736 liters, okay? So what we're saying is that any value between any two values is possible, and that it's a continuum from 0 to 50 in this case, with every possible value in between. All right, let's move on and take a look at one more representation of the data types, okay? So coming to this little flow chart here, you have to make an initial decision on the data type. Are you a quantitative variable or are you a qualitative variable, okay? Now, once you decided you're a qualitative variable, you're good to go. But if you're quantitative, you've got to ask one more question, and then is your data continuous or is your data discrete, okay? So in light of that, let's take a look at this example here. Yeah, I'm not going to do all of these with you. I'll let you finish up some more on your own later if you'd like to take a look at it. In fact, you can email me questions if you want to see whether or not you got them all right, but I'll do the first couple with you. So what we want to do is determine whether or not the following variables are qualitative or quantitative. If the variable is quantitative, state whether it's discrete or continuous. Okay, so let's take a look at the first one here. On the first one, we got the weight of various postal letters. Okay, so if we're talking about a weight, then that's something that we're going to measure, right? So that variable is going to be quantitative, isn't it? So if it's quantitative, I'm just going to abbreviate it as quant, okay? Then I have to decide whether or not it is continuous or discrete. Well, I'm measuring the weight, so that's going to be continuous. And again, I'm just going to abbreviate that like that, if you don't mind. Okay. How about the brand of the car you own? Well, the brand of the car you own, what would that be? See, I'm working on this one, number 2 now. Well, let's think about that for a second. Brand of car, okay. Well, brand of car, that's a label, isn't it? That's a category. So that's going to be a qualitative variable. And now I'm done because there's no break between qualitative variables. You are or you're not. Those are categories, right? Okay, let's take a look at total playing time of a CD, all right? So let's think about that for a second. So total playing time of a CD, well, the total playing time of a CD, that's time. The last time I checked, although some physicists would probably argue with me, the time is continuous. So the playing time of a CD, that's going to be quantitative. And it's going to be continuous again, okay? All right, number of songs on a CD. What about that one? Well, if I was talking about the number of songs on a CD, this is number 4 here, I think we'll stop after this one, then, well, what do we know? Well, we know, again, that's going to be quantitative. I'm counting something, though, this time. And so since I'm counting something, okay? Oops, I want to put a period there. Excuse me. Since I'm counting, it must be a discrete variable. Okay? All right, enough of this for now. Let's go do the actual LDI, and we'll get some more practice working with this material there, okay? All right, so this is LDI 4.1, what type of variable? So Hurricane Charles in August 2004 was blamed, or has been blamed, for at least 16 deaths. Listed below is information on other major storms and hurricanes that occurred from 94 to 2003. Of course, Katrina's not here because that happened after this. So for each of the variables, determine whether it is qualitative or quantitative. If the variable is quantitative, state whether it's discrete or continuous. So the first thing they're going to want to know is storm name. That's the first one they want us to look at. So what is the storm name? Well, hopefully you see the storm names are categories, okay? And since the categories are quantitative, qualitative, I can say the right word really. So those must be a qualitative variables, okay? All right, what about the date that the storm occurred? Okay, so we want to look at this column right here, the dates, all right? Okay, now think about this one for a second, okay? Now, you hopefully are seeing that it makes sense to do arithmetic between the dates. Now, you could argue that those dates are categories by the months, but if you think about July 94 to September 95, I can count the number of months between there and tell you the difference between the months, and that's going to make sense. So, in this case, the dates are monthly, so it is quantitative. We're going to go quantitative here. But notice by the way they're measuring the data that this is discrete. And that's the thing you got to be cognizant about, is that how did they measure the data? Time is continuous, but in this case we've decided to break it into months. So we are going with discrete quantities. It's an interesting thing about measurement. You have to think about how they're actually doing it to decide whether or not it's a discrete variable or a continuous variable. Okay, let's go with the category, okay? All right, now the categories, one of the things you got to remember with categories is it's not uncommon for us to put number labels onto categories, okay? I mean, what would it really mean to take a category 3 and subtract a category 2 from it? Does that get you back a category 1? So really the numbers are labels here. It's very similar to what we do with zip codes and social security numbers. Even though they're numbers, they're still labels, okay? So it turns out that that column, is qualitative. And if you think about it, it kind of is a big hint by the title of the column there. What? Categories, right? Okay, estimated damage cost, all right? Now again, you can make some argument one way or the other about whether this is continuous or discrete, probably back in B, if you wanted to argue one way or the other with it. Certainly would be more than willing to hear you out. But I'm going with, again, that this is quantitative discrete, and that's because, well, think about how we measure money. I mean, worst case is that you're at the gas station and they measure it down to the 10th of a cent, okay? So again, you could argue, and there are some argument that it's continuous, but I'm going to roll with it. Makes sense to me with rolling that it is discrete. Okay. All right. And last but not least, we want to look at the number of deaths caused by any particular hurricane. Hopefully, you see that that again is a quantity. So that's a quantitative variable, and that again is discrete. Okay. And hopefully that one makes perfect sense. You can't be just a little dead. Either you are or you aren't, right? Okay, well, a lot of information real quick in this first LDI. Definitely get down the variable types. Let me back up a little bit for you here. Make sure you understand that flow chart and the different variable types. Mastering how to identify what a variable is, what type of variable it is. It takes a little bit of practice, but the major thing right now is make sure you can tell the difference between a quantitative variable and a qualitative or a categorical variable. If you can get that major breakdown right there, you're doing real well. Okay, see you in the next one.